And we're live. Hello, everybody.
We're not.
We're now like a superhero group. We are joining you today as we normally do. Sorry, I actually started that sentence wrong. There's no way to finish it. We're very excited to be with you today, and we're meeting Emma Hilton later on. She did a very good interview with Andrew Gold recently about the absolutely disgusting display that we saw in the Olympics this week or for the last fortnight. So we'll be talking to her later. So let's not get on to the Olympics straight away. What else has been happening that has been interesting? I kind of, if you don't mind, I'd love to bring up something that's sort of tangential to our usual subject, but I think it's quite relevant, which is it has been very interesting to me to see the entire kind of artillery of the sensible middle classes being turned on Douglas Murray for one, and Elon Musk for another. It's been absolutely fascinating. It's almost like a switch was pulled, or a switch was clicked. Sorry, switches aren't pulled, and every single boring NPC commentator decided to start going for Elon Musk and Douglas Murray. And the Douglas Murray one is particularly interesting because he made those comments directly after October 7th. They are specifically about hate preachers. They are specifically about people who do not like the UK and want to destroy it. And it has been, what they've done is they've taken this section of interview and they painted him as a racist. They painted him simply as a sneering racist, because at one point he says, I don't want them. I don't want them here. But he is talking about hate preachers and he's talking about people who are violent. What have you thought about all this this week?
Well, there's been some extraordinary scenes. I think there was that chap, was it a Labour councillor caught on camera saying that he thought that the protesters, I believe, it was difficult to know exactly what group he was talking about. He said, but they should all have their throats cut, and people were around him cheering him on with this. Did you see that?
I did, yes.
That was I mean, I thought that was really quite extraordinary. I mean, if you're going to go after people for incitement to violence, that is definitely it. But again, it seems it's very much, sort of a left v right issue, as far as I can see, in terms of the commentators about it. But it shouldn't be. It should be, has somebody actually said something that is clear incitement to violence? Can you prove it? What is the harm? What is, can you actually prosecute on the basis of this? And I think that one was clear incitement to violence.
Well, to be fair, they have
other things aren't so clear cut, because I've seen, I probably wouldn't have even have thought of this in the past, but I see such a parallel between people making these sort of, there's a sort of cloud in between what somebody has said and they, and then they say harm. And that cloud is sort of indefinable and nobody really knows what it is. And I see this because people have said it about me so much, about, the stuff that you say leads into hateful rhetoric that causes real violence. And you're like, it's such an easy thing to say, isn't it? Without any need to prove anything. And because that's been sort of accepted, this is the rhetoric now. You can kind of say it about anything you want, even if it's true. Now, people, I sort of think, well, is it really? But maybe that's a good thing, that you have to actually look at precisely what somebody has said and then think, well, is this actually harmful? And saying that people should get their throats cut, I think also valid of yes, it is.
Yeah. But to be fair, they did arrest him, and he's been suspended from the Labour Party. I got into a little bit of trouble with my usual mates because I felt a bit sorry for him, because I think, part of the problem was that he was hyped up to do it by misleading reports from the very people who are trying to ban Douglas Murray and Elon Musk for their crimes of telling the truth. Although Musk, I do think, should be a little bit more careful with some of the things he tweets. I think he's not just
I think Musk is
Twitter
he's a bit reactionary. I'm not sure that Musk is saying the exact truth. I think what he's doing is he's tweeting based on something that he has seen, that is based on something that he has seen. I think you're right. I mean, I think Musk especially does need to be extremely careful because he does have a huge reach. I think this is indisputable. But
then again, he's telling more truth than the people who are calling him a liar, like Alistair Campbell.
Well, he's his own worst enemy when it comes to it. He believes in freedom of speech absolutism, but then he keeps falling for fake news left, right, and center. So he's kind of a poster child for, we don't want overt censoriousness, but we also need some kind of regulation of the truth, because Elon Musk is constantly tweeting things that turn out to be just completely inflammatory nonsense.
I mean, truth is so important. It's so fucking important. I mean, we being able to speak is incredibly important. But if you are going to be saying things, it's probably better if they are in fact true.
Right. And especially if he runs a media organization like Twitter, a media outlet, and he's all about how it should be, how it's the lack of censoriousness and the complete freedom of speech is supposed to be such a boon to Twitter. And it is. He's undermining that argument when he's the poster child for Twitter, and he's constantly using it to spread disinformation and misinformation accidentally,
It might be as simple as maybe he needs another account, like an account that basically, because millions of people would join it, and he could say, this isn't my official account, this is my where I'm spouting off. Because what I think he's trying to show is that Twitter is for instant reactions, Twitter is for provoking conversations, and that's fair enough. But his position is just so kind of different to everyone else's that, as we say, he's got to be more careful. But the thing that really annoys me, though, about the anti-Musk stuff is that his stewardship of Twitter has been a net good, because and he's a net good for reasons that people like Alistair Campbell and Rufus Hound and all these fucking NPCs don't even recognize, which is that, Meghan Murphy was off Twitter for 5 years. They banned her for 5 years for saying that men aren't women. I only got 2 years, But
it's hard to tell.
He brought.
It's hard to tell right now whether he's a net good sort of going forward. Certainly for now, I think is definitely allowing people back on the platform. I mean, I do, I'm not a free speech absolutist, but there is definitely the idea about when people say, oh yes, but there are limits. Those limits have to be really quite extreme. They really do. And I think the basic premise should be that you should allow everything unless you can really prove that it's harmful, rather than where we have got to now, which is, you can't say that, and it's okay because free speech isn't absolute, and there are consequences. I
mean, what's quite crazy about comes. Sorry, Helen, go ahead.
I'm just saying. Yeah, I'm just thinking that's not the position you should be starting from. You should be starting from the position that virtually everything is sayable unless you can prove that it's absolutely harmful to society as a whole.
Yeah,
I think that's it.
And
the other platforms are going further in the other direction. The censor. I mean, I don't want to jump into the Olympics yet because there's so much else we can talk about. But the censorship around the Olympics on the other platforms, and it's just the censorship in general. It's getting worse on Instagram and Facebook.
Richard Dawkins lost his whole account,
Richard Dawkins' account completely deleted. There's a great tweet from oh my god, how am I drawing a blank on her name? Giggle.
Sal Grover.
Sal. Sorry, Sal, it was momentary lapse. Love you. She tweeted like a picture. If you search XX on Instagram, it says no results. And if you search XY, it's like there's no problem, So the XX, literally, you can't use the letters because they're blocked, and it's like that's horrifying. Yeah. So I think the one good thing Elon has done with Twitter is to make it not censorious, but a lot of his other custodianship of Twitter has been a mess. And so it's difficult because I think a lot of people who are so cynical about freedom of speech and the ability for people to communicate online on social media, they see Elon Musk's bad behavior in these other arenas, his mistreatment of his children and his many parents of his sons and daughters, and his rash decisions and his retweeting things that turn out to be not true, and his just sort of his own censorship against Substack. And they say, see, oh, these are the bad people. So it's a kind of like, it muddies the message a bit. I wish there was a custodian who was running Twitter, who was a big advocate for freedom of speech, who wasn't also laden with all of this baggage that makes it harder to communicate to other people.
I think it would be very difficult to find someone like that, to be honest. Because in order to get to the stage where you can afford to buy Twitter, I mean, you aren't going to be like a sort of you are going to be a slightly odd person. I mean, there's just no question about it. So I mean, unless it was sort of a conglomerate. But it'd be interesting to think. It'd be interesting to see how Twitter would have reacted to how old Twitter would have been with the the XX thing. I don't want to get into too much either, but my guess is that it would have been censored. XX would have been sort of a banned offence.
Yeah, when you see Campbell and Rusbridger and Rory Stewart and all these people complaining about disinformation, you realize that, I bet you they haven't mentioned the boxing, by the way, and you realize that if you had to depend on these people, the news agents are another good example. If you had to depend on these people for your news, you would not know a quarter of what is going on.
No. There was a really strange article in The Guardian today. To be fair, it was Guardian Australia. I did tweet about it. Everyone's been tweeting about it. And it was like genuinely one of the most stupid articles I have ever written in my life. It was
read. You said written.
Sorry, it was rife with just stupidity, and not just misinformation, but real utter stupidity.
Can you give me an example? Because I can't read those things. It makes my heart break. What is the problem with what's going on? I mean, I've got it here. Sort of ignore the sexist rhetoric, revel in everything that upsets the haters. Now, already that's a terrible position to take, isn't it? It's like when people say, cry more. Like, I'm not in this fight in order to deliberately piss off my opponents. I just want to get to a state where we have, fair, reasonable, sort of societal consensus on sort of female spaces, etc. I'm not in this to tell people, cry more. It's a terrible idea. A terrible
They're just monkeys throwing poo.
The fucking Guardian to say revel in it. And it's just stupid. She's woven this ridiculous narrative of basically the women, the women who object to this, that she's tied them into sort of trad wives. And it's terrible. But my point wasn't to really go into this article. My point is that this is published in a newspaper. Before we had Twitter, etc., this is the sort of thing that I'd be reading on a Sunday morning, in the Observer. And this is what I'd be sort of fed.
Yeah.
And it would have, and it's insane. So,
there would be nothing counteracting it. There would be nothing. No, exactly.
So you can
letter in the newspaper a week later to see something counteracting it. Sorry, Helen, go ahead.
Well, I mean, you can complain about Musk, but the Guardian is feeding us misinformation. There's misinformation everywhere. I mean, what we all have to learn to do now is critical thinking. That's it.
It's scarier than ever.
The box, Pandora's box is opened. There is we are never putting misinformation back in the box. We all have to just learn to read and assimilate and think critically and properly. That's all we have. That's all we can do now. And that's all we should be teaching people. to do.
It's true, but we have to bear in mind that we have to work with the hardware that we've got. This is the scary part, because you can't train. Humans are very fallible, we're primates, with these very animal instincts, where it's very hard for us to digest true and false and to conduct critical thinking, because we have this sort of, our critical thinking faculties are hidden behind our tribal instincts, which means if we get tribal, our critical faculties literally get shut down. That region of the brain is not accessible if you become emotionally charged by a subject. This is why religious fervor stops people from thinking. This is why people join cults. This is why people are acting like chimpanzees flinging poo at everyone on Twitter, and that you can't get through to people. Once they're a sort of tribal, once their emotional connection to an issue is activated, that is in front of their ability to critically think. The critical thinking is hidden behind that wall, and it's not accessible. And you're seeing skeptics. You know, the skeptics movement is completely collapsed over the gender issue. They just can't access their own critical thinking faculties. And these are supposed to be the critical thinking kings of the world and kings and queens of the world. They're supposed to be the experts of critical thinking. So we're seeing how deep the problem is, that critical thinking is such a challenging thing for people to do. Like, I agree wholeheartedly that we need to teach people critical thinking right from the beginning of school. It needs to be first and foremost in our education curriculum. But it's a much bigger project than we think. It's really, really scary. And in the meantime, because we have these emotional systems and because we're not rational thinkers, we need a reputation management system to keep the herd in order. And this is where I deviate a little bit from kind of free speech absolutists, because I'm like, we can't just have a free-for-all and let everybody pick and choose what they like, because when people do that, they almost always fall for things that they need experts to help them figure out what's true and what's false, you know? So we need a kind of trust network and a reputation network where experts get the credibility they deserve, and stupid opinions don't rise through popularity because they activate people's emotions. We need that to be regulated through something, right? And then the leftists who are so angry at Elon Musk and who are so censorious, they've gone so far in that direction. Like, they're so scared of the loss of reputation management and trust that they're doubling down and going in the wrong direction. But to go way the other direction, you know, so you got like moral absolutism where they just censor anything that they think is dangerous to the tribe, that's going to feed misinformation to people. The opposite of that is just let anybody believe what they want. And when you see people like Joe Rogan who get into that mindset, and then you see them immediately falling for really kind of silly pseudoscience a lot very quickly. So it's a really, really challenging thing. It's really, really challenging subject, because we don't want censorship, but we don't want anarchy, informational anarchy. We need some kind of system. And we also need to teach people critical thinking, but it's so hard.
I think that the community notes thing on Twitter is really helpful. But I'll tell you what's really funny. I think every single Elon Musk tweet, whatever it's about, whether it's right or wrong, has community notes posted on it, you know. So it's becoming a political war in the community notes section.
Well, the more and more people that are allowed to do community notes, you know, it gets more and more like people just responding at the bottom of people's tweets. We're going to have community noting for community notes soon.
Can I suggest that anybody who is interested in rational thinking and wants to kind of you know, see how it can be used in a very good clinical, likable way is Warren Smith, who recently got famous because of his J.K. Rowling video. I think he lost his job for that video, but his videos on YouTube about rational thinking are really, really great. And he's been doing a lot on Mr. Beast recently, and has uncovered, and he's uncovered and helped uncover. He promoted this very small video by this guy who's just starting off, and he made this killer video about Mr. Beast that everyone should watch, because it shows how they are manipulating children in a variety of
I thought you meant
ways.
he was a guest on Mr. Beast. I was like, wow, that's cool. No, the opposite.
No, I'll just give you one example of one thing Mr. Beast does. They have like a line filling up on the screen, and when the line fills up the screen, the thing will be over. The promotion will be over. They do a promotion and they put the line down there. But what they do is, when the line is nearly at the end, they slow it down. They slow it down so everyone watches the whole promotion. the line filling up makes them think, oh, there's only this much left, but it's actually slowed down, so you have to watch the whole thing. Can I just add another thing? Let's talk not just about accidental misinformation. Let's talk about deliberate misinformation.
Disinformation, yeah.
Yeah. The Clive Lewis used to be my MP in Norwich, and the other day he retweeted a poster that said, "Let's fight back against the far right and transphobia." Now, I think he should be censored in some way for that, because what he is saying is gender critical feminists are the same as the far right, which is an argument that trans rights activists have been making for years. And it is, of course, bollocks. There is a huge amount of political opinions on the GC spectrum, but it can no way be described as far right. The vast majority of feminists who first got into this, and many who are still in it, are left-wing women. And this has been an assault on left-wing women, first and foremost. So Clive Lewis should apologize for that. Lynn Pinches, the brilliant woman we had on a few weeks ago who walked away very bravely from her pool match, she was meant to speak at this, and she was so intimidated she couldn't speak by the gang of, excuse my language, pricks who I was going to say something worse, but pricks who turned up to protest. So I think it's important to note every single time you see one of these people doing it. The other guy who has also been calling feminists far right is Nick Knowles, I think his name is, from Hope Not Hate. Do you know him? It might be Nick Knowles, but anyway, I hope we haven't sent a mob out after the wrong guy. But like, this guy is in Hope Not Hate, and he spread misinformation or disinformation. I'm not sure which, because I don't know if he did. Maybe he believed it, but he spread disinformation that a Muslim woman was attacked with acid. You know, and that's an outrageous lie. And just like what we were kind of vaguely admonishing Elon Musk for earlier on, I mean, that's much worse than anything Elon Musk did. You know, that's much worse. And yet he's still pontificating on Twitter as if the sun shines out of his arse. So
this is the tribal thing. The far right is the opposing tribe, right? And once you hear someone say far right, you can tell that tribalistic, the primate is in charge and not the critical thinking part of the brain. And they're like, the far right is evil, and we all have to gang together and oppose the far right. So anybody who's saying anything that's not in line with the tribe is far right, and anything you say that smells like the far right, this is like a hysterical mob of chimpanzees flinging poo, terrified of the opposing tribe, which is the far right. It's literally Planet of the Apes is what's going on. And that's what's going on in everyone's minds. If you hear the words far right, you're a chimpanzee, you're terrified of the opposing tribe of chimpanzees, and you're freaking out. And we have to deactivate that. It's really scary, because the more they feel the pressure, the more they it's a feedback loop. The more they double down. This is turning into an actual war, you know? Yeah. It is actually, and you really feel it on this side of the pond, because it's like they're insane. The left and the right, the blue states and the red states, it's like it's a simmering war, you know?
Yeah. Yes, I do wish people would tackle the actual issues rather than just use labels. I mean, obviously labels are simple, because you can just say, you can pretty much present something as this is something that you shouldn't believe in, exactly as you're saying, Artie, it's just tribal, rather than saying, well, you know, do you actually believe, you know, just like the question that I asked all the time at the beginning to people, you know, but when you say trans rights are human rights, what do you mean? What do you actually mean by it? You know, people say it simply because it's part of the package of the tribe that they are in. And they will say it without even a thought as to what it actually means. So, you know, do you actually believe that sort of male adults should have access to female spaces?
Maybe we need to put like oxytocin in the water.
But it turns out that it's actually it's worse than actually defending having to defend this position. They have actually gone along with the idea that a bloke can punch a woman in the face in the Olympics, because it's so tribal that they'll defend it. They actually do know what this sort of human rights idea is now, and it's less, and they're defending it regardless, because it is part of what, you know, the battle. The fault line's very, very straight down the middle, isn't it?
Yeah. I think,
sorry,
you know,
I want to put up there who Nick Knowles was. That's Nick Knowles is a TV presenter. He has nothing to do.
You've got to be very clear.
I thought it was Emma Bunton coming on the show. I told someone Emma Bunton was coming on the show today.
Oh, did you?
Yes.
That's great.
It's not Baby Spice. Come on.
Well, you know what? That's a great place to bring her in. So shall we bring her in?
Yes,
She's
please.
here waiting.
Yes,
Hello,
please.
Emma. I hope this is okay to bring you in a bit early. Hi there. How are you doing?
Emma Bunton.
Lovely to see you.
Oh, you are. Oh, there you are.
Welcome back.
Hi. Sorry, I was just taking off my walking boots, so I was kind of leaning down to get more comfortable.
It's so lovely to see you, Emma. Really,
I'm
really.
so sorry. I'm
glad
not
you're here.
Baby Spice.
Yeah. Baby Spice, and Baby Spice has a trans child, so
Yes.
it definitely. Yeah, I'm afraid so. She's fallen for it. Emma, thank you so much for coming on. I don't know. I just listened to it today. Andrew Gold's brilliant interview with you, where you go very deep into the kind of, you might say, the weeds on what DSDs mean and all this sort of thing. But I wanted to talk today about how I think, even though it's brilliant to see you on TV more making these arguments and representing sex matters and representing reality, it feels to me that in a way the whole DSD conversation has been a huge smokescreen to simply cover up the fact that the IOC, the Olympics committee, are actually applying the principles of self-ID. It actually, to me, it doesn't really have anything to do with DSDs. We do not know what conditions these people have. We only have their word to take for it. I just think they're men. What do you think of all that? Is there anything in that?
Well, so I think generally in the kind of conceptual way, we've seen DSDs used as a smokescreen for an awful lot, right? So this goes beyond sport and actually, you know, ideologists kind of using DSDs to start talking about what sex really is. And here are some people with complex medical conditions. And that somehow means that, you know, evolution is wrong, or we need to start reframing what we think about sex and that kind of thing. So DSDs have been used just by people, you know, pushing various ideologies for some time now. And I've always been, and I will maintain that, I've always been really quite strongly defensive about the use of people with complex medical conditions. And you know, let's be clear, this is a kind of medical condition that has some kind of social and cultural significance as well, right? If you have a genetic disorder that affects how your kidney functions, you're unlikely to be, you know, stigmatized or labeled in horrible ways, or indeed weaponized for someone else's ideology. So yes, DSD is a smokescreen, and now we're just seeing that continue, right? You know, my arguments don't rest on whether the DSD exists, or, you know, we could be really charitable, and I tend to, you know, sit towards that. And particularly, I've got a long history of working with people with genetic disorders, and I'm, you know, I have a lot of empathy on that side. But really, from you know, someone who genuinely looked female when they were born, and then didn't know that they were female until some doctor told them, versus, you know, the very opposite end, which is a male deliberately entering the female category in order to cheat or disrupt, at least. The biology arguments don't actually discriminate between those groups, because we are just talking about what their bodies are. And I don't need to talk about, you know, the kind of moral values of what they're doing, or those kinds of things. So yes, the IOC maybe are using DSDs as a smokescreen, which is to hide their policy that it wouldn't even matter if these were the worst end of, you know, the polar spectrum of males who are deliberately entering to cheat, because they would allow them to, as long as their documents said that they were women. So
yeah, and I wonder whether this is a bit of you know, North London privileged types that Mark hangs around with, because is this Mark Jones? Is that his name?
Mark Adams.
Mark Adams. Sorry, Mark Adams is famously Keir Starmer's best man, and his interviews very much reminded me of Starmer when Starmer was being asked whether it was right to say that women have a cervix. He, especially early on in this scandal, Adams was questioning the morality of even asking the question. He was trying to shut it down as soon as it came up. And I think that this is just a kind of privileged London set imposing their belief system on the world, really.
Well, but it's also, I mean, it is also his job, though, isn't it? I mean, he is. Yeah. That's his job. Like, he's media for the IOC. You know, they're paying him to do a job to defend them. So
yeah, but I
think we have to understand, right? The IOC, that we're all old enough to, to remember when the IOC were the kind of the cream of clean sport and good sport, and they're not that anymore, right? They're politicians as much as any political party is, and they see it as well within their remit now, not just to, argue for clean sport or for female sport and gender equality. They see it that they're part of this social engineering project, whatever kind of, label you want to put on that. They see themselves as part of this progressive movement for a more just world. And of course, we all understand the value that sports brings to particularly people who are, from poorer countries, who don't have, the kind of opportunities that this North London middle class set does. We understand the value of sport in creating kind of equality in an unjust world. But the IOC have really seized this, and we've seen the shift, and it's matched completely what we're seeing, on Twitter X, whatever we call it now, and around, the groups of people that we all interact with, how the new generations of kids are, viewing the world differently, and this all means something different. The IOC are really leaning into that. Their latest framework is human rights led, right? It's not about sport or scientific evidence or the reality of people's bodies. The hard questions that need to be asked and the hard choices that need to be made for things like fairness and boxing, safety. They don't want that. They want to be a human rights organization. And that, to me, starts to get them away from what a sports federation should be doing, which is getting their hands dirty.
Exactly.
Absolutely.
They don't want to get their hands dirty because they're a bunch of executives who want all the glory of wokeness. But the actual hard work, like you said, getting your hands dirty in implementing these policies, they've been shunting it off onto all of these other organizations. Like, the reason the boxing issue came to a head is because it's one of the only sports in which the hard, messy, dirty work of sorting out who gets to be eligible to play and who doesn't, who gets to get into the Olympics, the IOC had to do it themselves. In all these other sports, like in athletics, you have to go through a separate organization to get into the Olympics. So the IOC washes their hands of those separate organizations who have to do the hard work of saying, no, you need to take a sex test. No, you have to be, of enforcing all the hard nitty gritty of establishing the policy. And the IOC can just stand above it and say, it's all in the passport. We don't care. But then with boxing, because the IOC kicked out the IBA over Ukraine, because they're now a human rights organization, the IOC, and they won't work with you if you're not on the same side as they are in terms of the war. They had to take over the work of sorting out who's eligible and who's not. And suddenly they couldn't just wash their hands of it. And that's when the mess, the shit hit the fan on this particular sport, because the IOC had to do the dirty work that for all the other sports they had just downloaded onto these other groups.
It puzzled me for a minute, because I thought, but hang on, they have, like, Semenya, for instance, cannot run in the 200 and the 400. They can only run in the 800. And
no, they can't. World Athletics closed those loopholes now
everything
across all events.
And so so it's not like the IOC doesn't and, like, it's not like they don't understand. They know exactly. But then it's exactly what I realized, Artie. What you're saying is that because it's just a different organization and it's outsourced, But this one, there is no outsourcing. So they've fucked it up so badly.
But
It's the worst event for the IOC to be doing this in, right? Because you could at least make the argument that if they had found themselves in charge of athletics, that there isn't a safety risk.
Yeah.
You know, there's clearly fairness, but at least not safety risks.
Yeah,
absolutely. And if I may just say, the IOC would not stand for 1 second for unfairness in a male sport. They simply would not stand for it. But they are able to stand for it in a female sport to such an extent that they would actually not mind, or that they would actually put a woman in danger of being killed in the ring. I just want to read a quick thing to you. I'm sure, Emma, you know about this person. Peyton McNabb was a high school volleyball player in North Carolina. A trans athlete, a man, on the opposing team spiked the volleyball, hitting McNabb in the face and causing her to fall backward. This incident resulted in McNabb sustaining a concussion, traumatic brain injury, partial paralysis on her right side, vision problems, and ongoing mental health issues such as anxiety and depression. That's what can happen to a woman in volleyball.
Anyone who has read about or even watched volleyball understands that the importance of upper body strength. This is where men, far outpace women in terms of physicality. Understands upper body strength in a spike, understands getting over that ball and smashing it down as hard as you can. The point being to stop your opponent being able to reach it, right? And what happened there was a male hit Peyton in the face.
Yeah. And I used to know someone who was on the other side of this debate who played against a man in a volleyball match. He spiked the ball at her and it broke her finger, So it's like, do you want women's sports or not, Sorry, there's a troll here. I'm just trying to get rid of him.
Importantly, it's not just really about thinking, do we want women's sports? Because I think most people, including the IOC, are completely like, yeah, of course we want women's sports. What they're not apparently able to do is understand we want women's sports. Why do we want women's sports? Well, because men are bigger and stronger and faster. But what does that really mean in terms of the biology and who we have to exclude? There's loads that you can't police women's bodies. We're not policing women's bodies other than, are they female? Yeah. And it's perfectly normal to police categories. Yeah. It's perfectly normal to weigh people before they compete in a weight.
Exactly. Everyone understands weighing. But suddenly sex testing is just the most abhorrent thing that you could possibly imagine.
It's one woman in one sport who was banned from the sport or who was taken out of the competition because she weighed as much as something like a half a banana.
Oh, it was 6 grams of tangerine, wasn't it? Yeah, 100 grams.
And this woman, before, the night before, my understanding is she had blood taken out of her to try and hit that weight limit, right? So you'd think if they were willing to be a bit tolerant about people who are, really trying and breaking a boundary, 100 grams, half a banana or whatever, is something that you might say, okay, we can just stretch it a little bit here. But they didn't. It's resolute, not allowed. And if you have a rule, you have to stick to it, and you have to be allowed to do whatever it takes to stick to that rule. Because if it's a good rule, and we all agree it's a good rule that, boxers or wrestlers have to be certain weights to have fair fights. And we understand that the female category needs to exclude people with, male biology, whether they've got that because they've got a medical condition or whether they're just, trans or whether they're just cheating males.
Yeah.
And there's the other idea, isn't it, that sex testing is so abhorrent. I mean, there was an article that you were actually cited in, Emma, that went on about sex testing, sort of palpitating the clitoris and measuring the size of a woman's breast, and it was just insane.
I remember that one. Yeah.
Yet people are perfectly happy with the understanding that if you're being tested for drugs. I mean, I remember being tested for drugs when I first started work years and years and years ago. Everyone had a mandatory sort of drug test. And you have to pee in a cup in front of somebody just to make sure that, no, you're not taking someone else's pee.
That is my worst nightmare. I'm very pee shy. I won't even use a urinal. This is why I never want to go to jail, because you have to pee in front of people. And I'm like, I will never commit a crime. I will never have to pee in front of someone. Sorry, go on.
I know no one complains about this because it's just accepted. Like all of the stringent drug testing tests that all the cyclists, etc., go through, everyone just accepts it. And then suddenly the idea of a sex test it's just, oh my God, it's sort of against human rights.
And I think the IOC, when they called it right at the start of this, and honestly, we all knew where this was going. We all understand, anyone who studies sports understands very early on what we're dealing with here and what statistically is the most likely outcome. And for sure, that's what's happened, right? But what they called sex testing was the bad old days. And I kind of agree with them, but that's because they weren't running sex tests in any kind of ethical fashion. And the idea that there were nude parades where women were judged based on masculinity of their features. Nobody's proposing that sports feds do that anymore.
Yeah.
There are very simple tests, much more simple than they were back in the 60s and 70s, the bad old days. There are very simple tests that will give you an answer that is almost always correct, right?
Yeah.
I'm not arguing it's foolproof, but sports feds could very simply do a karyotype, right? Have you got XX or XY? And for almost all athletes, that would be accurate enough. It's when they find something incongruent, okay, you've registered for the female category, and we are talking an eyeball, you kind of look like a girl, but actually you've got XY chromosomes. That flags something going on. At that point, those athletes need to go for medical testing. And if people think that medical testing is not routinely invasive, if it doesn't involve further tests, if it doesn't involve ultrasounds and internal exams to understand anatomically what's going on with the DSD, then they're very naive. This is routine in medical testing and examination for a genetic disorder. I am not proposing sports feds do a nude parade, but that will happen in the diagnosis of a DSD. But sports
once in life, though, if you have a DSD, you have to know what your DSD is. It has to happen one time in your life. You have to figure out what your biology is and have a document that's certified. Once in your life, you have to figure out if you have male or female karyotype. You have to figure out if you have functioning testicles inside your abdomen. You should want to know this, and you should want to know how it's going to affect your athletic performance. It is not invasive. I would want to know if I thought I was a girl, and I would want to know if I had testicles, you know? Anyway.
But not just that, you know, everyone in their lives when they are adults, whether you have testicles or a uterus, you do then go through invasive tests all of the time. You know, women have smear tests. They do, because we want to make sure that we are healthy. And men have, I don't know what they do to you, actually. They do.
They cough.
You do some coughing and maybe a finger, I don't know, but there's something. But, you know, these are, again, they are routine. They're not lovely, but they are routine. But this isn't something that is going to happen to every athlete that goes to the Olympics, you know, with some random people saying, oh, you know, just take your kit off. I want to have a look down there. It's not the same. And I know the people who are talking about it. I mean, some people are prepared to say this is what will happen in an insane way. But most people will, like somebody like Laurie Penny, will go back and say, the Nazis started sex testing and they used to do this.
Yeah.
And it's just it's a pretense. It's an implication that this is what will happen now, because they just want to muddy the waters. And you've got to ask yourself, why do you want to muddy the waters? I don't want the waters
that's
to
a
be
monkey
muddy.
throwing poo again. Laurie Penny is a chimpanzee throwing poo. You know, she's just,
It feels like the idea that sex as information is something we shouldn't know. And that extends beyond sport, right? That sex is something that's some deeply private thing that nobody else should understand or even detect unless you wish to share that information. And that completely, you know, in the case of kind of gender identity, often just conflicts with what we can see. It's very difficult to keep. There is information that is nominally private, and one could argue that sex is one of those. But you can't then stop people detecting it anyway. We use the argument about pregnancy. Now, choosing to discuss being pregnant is something that's quite private for the woman. She should not be compelled to discuss it. or even acknowledge she's pregnant unless she really wants to. That may have ramifications in employment and health and safety and that kind of thing. But it can't stop other people looking at the woman saying, oh, I think you're pregnant. I'm not going to ask you, but I'm pretty sure you're pregnant, right?
And at some point, it's pretty fucking obvious.
So sex, it's almost like we're not allowed to have information about sex because that's some kind of, just in this abstract way, it's deeply traumatic for people.
Yeah.
Yes.
The argument, or rather the rationale, is that some people do perhaps find it deeply traumatic that others know their sex, but it's pointless to pretend that others don't know their sex, because most of the time we're talking about something that's really obvious in almost every human being. So that
actually brings me on to a very something that a few people have pointed out, and it was very amusing to see it being done by trans activists. But when the DSD thing came in about him, and the DSD thing was suggested, it was suggested that he was born with female equipment and so on, and as he got older, he went through male puberty, and they discovered he had a DSD and stuff. But suddenly, every trans rights activist was saying born as a female.
Yes.
Every single one of them forgot that they are supposed to say assigned female at birth. And it was for the very people who the word assigned female at birth are. Can you explain to people who may be new to this what assigned female at birth has been used to do in this conversation?
Yeah, so assigned female at birth originally was language designed for people with DSDs to describe how we're talking about a reproductive system that might have some ambiguity. It might have some conflicting features. And when we said assigned, I didn't say assigned female, but when the medical kind of care people around these disorders said assigned female at birth, or indeed assigned male at birth, what they were kind of acknowledging is that looking at someone's external genitals when they're born, so looking about whether they have a penis, whether they have a vulva, or indeed if they have something that you can't quite tell, or in some cultures, it's not a perfectly healthy boy, so we're just going to say this is a girl, right? So, you know, there are cultural kind of signifiers around this too. But it was acknowledgement that what you were looking at when a baby's born, which is mostly between their legs, right, might not accurately reflect everything else inside. So this is language, medical terminology for people with DSD, should that kind of conflicting characteristics, you know, be part of it. And what trans rights activists did was then say, well, I was observed, you know, as a male or a female at birth, but that doesn't reflect me inside. So they co-opted that language to argue that what my sex was observed as, what I was assigned as, isn't my true sex, which is how I feel in my, you know, brain. And so that was always horrifying to me, because these are people with medical conditions, and we don't tend to approve of people without that medical condition using the language, weaponizing it. And then what we're seeing now is, so in the interim years, people say, oh, duh, don't you know that DSDs exist? And I'm the last person that you needed to tell that DSDs exist. Right? Don't you know that DSDs exist? And some people look like this, but they're not actually this. Of course we know that. And now we're talking about the very type of people who may have looked like they're one sex when they're born, but actually all of that internal biology is the opposite sex. Trans rights activists are now, they haven't just co-opted the language, they're now saying we're not allowed to use that language for the medical group for whom it was developed. And this is now not just co-opting and feeling kind of, you know, violated by that kind of cuckoo-ness, but now they've just outright stolen it. I've watched some of them argue with me. They won't answer. What's assigned female at birth mean? What is a midwife looking at? And it's like, you know, when your computer goes into that wheel of death, it's like, I don't know what to say. I can't. So I'm just going to not say anything. And then, you know, I'm going to slag her
off. I'm going to say, I saw what I'm going to say. Don't, you know, look it up. Google is free.
I've already answered that question. I've already answered that. That's my favorite.
I've already answered it.
When they say I've already answered that question, you should always say, "Could you give me a link to where you are?"
I do, and they're like, "It's up, it's right up there." I did that. Somebody posted some arrows.
But the way the transgender movement has co-opted so much of this is really interesting. Like the idea that sex is private. I don't even think most trans people in the real world, trans activists say that, but homosexual transsexuals are still on the gay dating apps. They know they're male, and so it's not so much that their sex is private. It's that they just want to be a little bit sensitive about it. It's the other group, the cohort, it's the activists, and of course some of the more extreme autogynephiles who really believe that you can't discuss the fact that they're not the sex that they claim to be, because it will cause them internal distress, because they're this is an internal thing, a psychological thing for them. But what was I just? Oh yeah, the aesthetics thing is really upsetting, because the transgender movement has made sex all about your appearance has to override your biology, and now we're seeing that your appearance must override your biology is completely taking over the discourse. People are saying things like you were saying, Helen. They're going to bring out calipers and measure your breasts and your vulva and all of this stuff. That's all. They're obsessed with biological sex being an aesthetic, and they can't even comprehend that it's a biological thing now. Yeah, it's crazy. But I wonder if the way that everybody's talking about the fact that these boxers are literally male and female, as opposed to their gender identities, that this might undermine the transgender movement. Like in the previous Olympics at Tokyo in 2021 with Laurel Hubbard, no one was arguing that Laurel Hubbard was biologically female. Everyone was arguing that Laurel Hubbard should have been included in the women's weightlifting because of Laurel Hubbard's gender identity. And there was no discussion of biological sex tests. And in fact, they were arguing that sex tests shouldn't happen for Laurel Hubbard at all, because there was a tacit acknowledgement that
to be fair,
there was no need.
And in this one, they're saying, oh, no, their sex test was female. There's no question. And they're not saying, well, it doesn't matter what their sex test is because their gender identity overrides it. They're now saying, no, sex tests do matter, and they will come out female. And if they come out male, they were forged.
The argument is made to fit the result, though, isn't it?
Yeah.
With Laurel Hubbard, of course, everyone knew he was a bloke, so it had to be, well, it doesn't matter. Whereas this one, because there was definitely some ambiguity because it's different. People are just saying, oh, well, it's either Russian misinformation, you've been taken in, or you just don't know. You just don't know, or we can't have sex tests.
But now we're seeing
they want the political outcome they want.
Number of pivots that they're having to make and now I'm not just talking about trans rights activists or even necessarily trans rights activists, but people who are supporting Khelif, for example, who is one of the boxers in the spotlight. We're seeing just this scrambling, because nobody ever thought 10 days ago when I was first talking with journalists and stuff, it's been a hell of a 10 days.
But you have been brilliant. Everything I've seen, just as an aside, everything I've seen you've said has been really, really spot on. And it's been great, actually, because I think, you've been on a lot of places saying the same thing really calmly and very well. And I do think it's helped a lot of people understand. So well done.
But the pivoting at the start, when they had failed a gender eligibility test, we all know that's just people are too squeamish to say sex, or indeed want to muddy the waters. But they'd failed it, and it was completely obvious to me what that meant, and there was a certain amount of they failed it. You need to understand what we're saying here. And of course, the rational load of us understand what they're saying. But the other side, but they didn't actually say it. Well, what else do you think a male karyotype is?
Yeah.
But they didn't come out right. There is no other rational explanation for male karyotype unless they've got a Y chromosome. So let's just be rational here. I know we're asking sometimes people on X and activists, they're not always that rational. And then it was, okay, well, maybe IBA, the IBA, the boxing federation that banned these boxers from the female category, maybe it's all just, like you say, Russian misinformation. And there are a lot of claims, and I'm sure some of them are credible, about this federation. Boxing is a dirty sport.
Financial stuff.
Any sport that, you know, pays people lots of money and that attracts a huge amount of gambling is always a hotbed of corruption, right? It's money laundering and that kind of, I'm not making those claims about either, but I can understand.
Yeah. Boxing and the mob famously go together, you know. Yeah.
So then it was like, what do you think they're lying? I mean, you're not now just saying that they haven't been clear enough. You're now saying they're outright lying. And you know, they're talking about WADA accredited labs, so the World Anti-Doping Association, who use labs, and they're saying we use those labs. You've got to have to say they're lying. And then, as you know, and you're just thinking we're colliding straight towards what we said 10 days ago, which is that these are going to be XY males with the DSD that maybe made them look female at birth, taking the, you know, most kind of charitable view. But they have male advantage. And that's because we know sports. And there's no reason why XY females, if you like, who don't have any male biology, particularly turn up in sports. We know, we've seen that Rio podium. We understand precisely what kind of XYs are in sport. And then you've got coaches and, we're suppressing Khelif's testosterone. Well, you don't need to do that unless the testosterone is masculinizing and male puberty and male development. You don't need to do that.
They actually said they're suppressing Khelif's testosterone?
Yeah, there was an
so that also rules out androgen insensitivity syndrome.
Absolutely.
Entirely.
Yeah,
you don't suppress something that doesn't activate, right?
No.
Yeah, there was a French article. Wasn't there? There was a French article. Sorry. There was a French article that I read today that was done with somebody that had been like a biologist or a. And
now this is a biologist at the University of Bordeaux. So now we're not just the Russian disinformation. We're bringing academics into this, and nobody has been contradictory. Everything has been building, but a coherent picture, which is the one I predicted 10 days ago. So, and so who else is going to get discredited? Which other arguments are they going to seize on? And, you know, we'll see what happens, I guess, afterwards. Hopefully, well, we know that the IOC are going to get a change of
leadership,
and hopefully that's going to be a good thing for someone who has in World Athletics committed to protecting the female category.
Yes, and it looks like it might be Seb Coe. He's seriously considering it, and he seems to have completely peaked. So that is great news. You know,
that would be. I did see today that Khelif, and maybe this is slightly tangential, is going to go to court to. To maybe try and get people for misinformation. I mean, it might be that I'm absolutely certain that there has been a ton of abuse, but you know, abuse as opposed to people saying, "I think this is an XY male," which I'm going to say is not abuse. But it seems like a bit of a risky strategy to me, unless what they're thinking now, the medal is won. You know, it's going to come out, and so like we can just keep it going. You know, keep the story alive. Maybe make some money out of it. I don't know.
I actually suspect that Khelif's threat to sue people, or at least get people into court for harassment, is not necessarily directed at any individual, because, like you said, a court, I think, would take into account reasonable opinion and stating a fact, which, you know, we try not to prevent. I agree with you, Helen, earlier. Free speech needs to be the default until you can prove that there's, you know, a harm from it. So I suspect what Khelif's legal team might be thinking about is just a generic kind of injunction style thing about Facebook and X and that kind of thing. That de facto saying Khelif is male is part of this, you know, circle of harassment, and therefore those platforms won't be allowed to you know, publish that. And that feeds them back into this idea that we've been talking about deliberate misinformation about the premise that someone's sex, even though we're, you know, 99.9% sure, not just what Khelif's sex is, but precisely what male DSD is. The idea now that platforms who are publishing what I think are rational expert assessments like mine might be shut down just for saying, you know, Khelif is a biological male who may have been assigned female at birth. Because ironically, I know he has used medical language properly. funny.
Is there actually any evidence of a DSD specifically? Like, there's circumstantial evidence that Khelif was raised as a girl culturally, but is there any evidence other than the birth certificate, which is already a little bit suspicious, that Khelif is 5ARD or has a DSD? I mean, there's even been some rumors that people are seeing bulges in some photographs and things, and that there may in fact be external genitals as well. Is there any information one way or the other on that?
So one of the DSDs that's now firmly in the frame, and it was the one I predicted early on, is the one that Caster Semenya has. So that is 5ARD. And what we know with 5ARD is that babies can be born perhaps more often atypical for boys, so a not healthy boy. And like I say, in some cultures that will just be, you know, how women are framed, and women are like imperfect men,
Not
right?
men.
So not a perfect boy, therefore a girl. But what happens at puberty, because these males are fully testosterone responsive, so whatever's gone on with their external genital development at puberty, they're just responding like, you know, any other boy. And frankly, in any other boy, that means your penis grows, right? Because, well, I assume, you know, I haven't experienced a male puberty, but I understand boys' penises grow at puberty.
The lucky ones.
So at male puberty, actually, what you find, certainly with 5ARD, is that there's a kind of catch-up. So a boy that didn't quite grow a typical looking penis in the womb, and then when they were born, you know, the penis is maybe smaller, it's very underdeveloped perhaps, and actually starts to catch up a bit. And what's really interesting, and I don't know if we want to talk about this, but people with 5ARD, so males with 5ARD, they may be recorded as a girl at birth, and they may grow up perhaps thinking that they're a girl. Over 50% of them change their legal documents after puberty to say that they're male.
Huh. That's interesting.
It's by far.
They don't just grow masculine traits from the internal testicles. The testicles may in fact descend, and they may in fact grow a penis.
I don't think the testicles descend. Some of them have got descended testicles anyway, and they're removed at birth.
Oh, okay.
That's a really obviously conflicting diagnosis. But the testes are doing their thing at puberty, and they're pumping out all this testosterone. So I'm talking about, you know, something that looked a bit like a clitoris can grow. Yeah. We know what testosterone does to clitoris, right?
Yeah.
5ARD is really common in the Dominican Republic, and there's a culture where they call them huevadoches. Have you heard of this?
Eggs at 12.
Huevos is like eggs,
right? Because it's not eggs. By eggs, they mean testicles.
Like you grow balls at age 12. At age 12, you get balls, huevadoches. Yeah. And I thought that was almost a poetic way of, there's a word for it that's not just very technical.
And it's kind of romanticized in the Dominican Republic a bit. And when you have genetic clusters of disorders, which this one does cluster in the Dominican Republic, although not exclusively in the Dominican Republic. In fact, the highest incident globally is in Turkey and Egypt.
Wow.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. Which starts to, you know, all those claims that the women that are targeted for this are all kind of, you know, global South Black women, that starts to look different. And there are different medical systems in place and different, you know, educational backgrounds and that kind of thing. But, you know, these are girls, and they know, I'm not saying they're girls, they're observed as girls, and they're known to be growing up when at 12, you know, the eggs arrive, and then, you know, it's like you can understand, it's like a cultural shift into manhood, if you like. And, you know, all those kinds of things that, you know, we use to explain weird biological phenomena.
And it does seem, I mean, from everything that we've seen, that my guess is, as Emma says, this is what's going on. However, I think there's some blurring of the truth in the he's still seen as a girl. I think it was very obvious to everyone. And I think some people's pointing out, and it made a lot of sense to me, that the trainers and everyone do know, because of the carrying him around, you know, on the shoulders,
Also, some early some translations of other things he said, where he used the male form. He said when we were boys, he used a word from the time he was a soldier, and he used the male variation of that form. It's just, I mean, it's just a con, and it's extraordinary how few people are able to apply Occam's razor to this and think instead that he is part of the infinitesimally small, unfortunate people who have these DSD conditions. Beatles, I better kind of wrap it up, because I have to. I'm doing Andrew Doyle tonight, so I'll see you all on that. But I did want to ask one final thing before you went. You have a very different position. You've been very much central to this for the last 10 days. Do you get any sense that the extraordinary outrage of men fighting women in the ring, that there's an equal outrage about to come because of it? Do you think well, this is a bit of an inside GC way of putting it, but do you think this piqued a lot of people?
I think it has piqued a lot of people, and we knew that sport has always been the coal face of this wider kind of thing about males and which bits of female society and culture they're allowed to try and take over, right? So I think it has piqued a lot of people, and that's because it's sport. And most people, even we're still seeing some people cling to the idea that males don't have an advantage in sport, and it's because 100 years ago a female ice skater once managed 4 turns, or something, it's kind of nonsense. It's something, our bodies, and we talked about being able to detect the sex of someone else earlier. It's something that we do understand very intuitively in our own lives and how that affects us. Different body shapes in sport, but males generally kind of scaled up a bit, if you like. So I think it will pique a lot of people, because I think even if, I was making the same arguments about Caster Semenya, that's unfair. But I think people also understand that boxing is dangerous, right? We all grew up and we all know that boxers have died, okay? And we remember traumatic stories, and some of us may have, I don't mind watching boxing, actually. I quite enjoy it. I may have gambled on it occasionally. But we all remember these horrific stories, and boxing has done so much to try and make it safe. If you read the rules around boxing, you're allowed to wear lower train tracks, right, on your teeth. That's all right. Not allowed to wear upper train tracks. You need a mouth guard if you've got upper train tracks, right? So boxing has tried really hard to make things safe. But I think people still intuit that it's really quite a dangerous sport. It's one that people can die. Yes. Okay. Yeah. And at this point now, you start to think about, if you permit males into a boxing ring with females, you're thinking about general levels of violence. This is not unfairness. This is about violence and what we're willing to let females who may not have consented to be in a boxing ring had they known that person was male, right? So it's a perfect storm. I don't like using a perfect storm because it makes it sound like we've been looking for a perfect storm, right? But it is a perfect storm of a dangerous sport, lack of consent, a violent sport, and
I think that's such a good point. It's that lack of consent, isn't it? Because being Welsh, I remember as a kid, maybe as a teenager, I remember like famously Johnny Owen, like Welsh boxer, died. And it was apparent to us all then, like boxing, as you say, really, really is dangerous. And that lack of consent is an incredibly important point.
We all remember the moment when one of the first girls tried to stop the fight and was sent back in with the words, "He's a man," and tried to stop the fight. These women did not even know he was. They were as confused by the issue as everyone else, and they entered into the ring and only found out then that they were fighting a man.
And isn't it fabulous after all that they found their own way of protesting?
Yeah. Oh, that was superb. Absolutely superb. And we've all taken it on. It was absolutely brilliant. Yeah.
Emma, I'm going to have to call it there. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much. Absolutely brilliant.
And I'm hoping that we never have to discuss another sports controversy, because we're now seeing the real victims of it, and anyone who supports it is responsible for any more victims. So thank you, Emma. I hope you're less busy, but more satisfied with what's going on in the future. See you soon.
Bye.
Say hi to the other Spice Girls for me.
Oh yeah. Okay, great.
Absolutely fucking
And
brilliant.
we were live on Twitter today as well. That's exciting.
Yes,
We
I
have
just changed
two
his name, but that's why that bloke was able to troll for a while, but he seems to have lost interest. We'll be on Twitter. You can also find the podcast version of this on Spotify and Apple, so look out for that too.
Oh, we're on Spotify now. Finally, that's great.
Yeah.
Superb.
Video,
Well
audio?
Sorry?
Video and audio?
I think just audio, but maybe video.
Okay.
Who knows? Who knows?
Okay.
I'll try and figure that out. But
done.
Emma, stay there.
Let's get back on Andrew Doyle's thing then.
Yes, thank you. I'm looking forward to that. I'm going to have to head off, but I will see
all right,
you
guys.
soon. I'll end the stream and then I'll say goodbye to everyone properly. Hold on a sec.
Okay.
Bye, everyone. Thank you. Please
Bye.
like and subscribe.
Like and subscribe. Pew, pew.